Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. Now when I first started this channel, I had a vision of slotifying a tank, and I've had that conversation with subscribers since then as well. Now I've been quite limited in my thought process on a tank, limited to basically a World War II style tank. I like the Jag Panther, that's my most favourite tank, but the trouble is if you slotify a tank like a Jag Panther, you're probably going to start with a kit, and that's going to be quite fragile. Also, tanks just don't run fast, so it's going to look really boring going around the track. Unless you overpower it, then it's going to look silly. You could also buy a toy tank, which would be more robust, so negate the fragility of the kit, but then you're back to a World War II tank, and it's still not really going to work. And I've kind of been locked in that mindset of World War II tank. It's not going to really come across very well, probably boring. So I put the idea on the shelf and I've moved on with other projects. Now, the other day I was in the toy shop and my daughter had bought me a voucher card for Christmas. Now the idea was to spend it on Hot Wheels, but I saw this and I instantly thought, now that is a tank that would be epic. It's got rubber tracks, so it's robust. It's a toy, so it's going to be robust. Now, initially, I did think I could use the gearboxes and motors in this, but I'm not quite sure that I can, so we may have to change that. But it looks cool. It's a space tank or something vaguely similar to that. So you're not stuck in this gotta go slow World War II kind of thing. So I think this tank could be absolutely epic. Now, to be honest, I'm going to build this tank mostly on my 3D printer, because after the last video that I did of the sprint bug, I do need to let something else do the heavy lifting, and that is going to be my poor 3D printer, because I need to sort of de-escalate my brain a little bit after a month's worth of very, very careful carving. So this will be a nice welcome relief for me to sort of do something much more simple and let my poor 3D printer do the heavy lifting. So what I intend to do with this tank is turn it into a monster slot car. Now I have no idea if this is going to work. What I'm hoping for is to end up with a tank with spoilers on it and a drop arm, and overpowered, so as you pull away the ties or the tracks inflate and it all looks a bit mad and it looks a little bit dramatic. That's what I'm hoping for. What we actually get, well, that's another story. So I think what we ought to do is we would open this box up, because it's brand new, it's completely unopened. I'm going to put some batteries in it and I'm going to run it around this table just to see where we're going to start from. But I suspect we're going to be taking away all those gearboxes and everything else anyway and turn it to a more conventional slot car setup, probably with a 25k long can in it, geared 4:1, just for that torque and the overall speed and the dramatic effect of it all, maybe. But anyway, we'll see. So let's get this box opened, get some batteries in it and play with it, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so we're on, batteries in, and we're done. So let's just see what we're going to do with this. That's not very impressive, is it? Hang on. Right. I think the rubber is probably a little bit stiff. Let's give it a bit of a run. Right, well, that's pretty pathetic actually. It can't really get past its own rubber. So there we are. Well, I gotta admit I was hoping for more. But yeah, well, I think what we can gain from that is it moves, and I think the tracks are a little bit rubbery, so maybe if they're warmed up a little bit, and when it gets going it's quite quick. But I think it's going to work as a slot car in one way or another. These tracks are pretty robust. How slidey is it? It's got a little bit of slip, so I think we'll be okay. We got plenty of room for a drop arm and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, you know, oh my word, it won't even... Yeah. Okay, right. So maybe that's a bit of a fail. But what we'll do is I'll get you on my table now and we'll pull this apart and we'll just see where we're at with regards getting all the running gear replaced for something rather more powerful. Okay, so first of all, I apologise for the background noise. It's raining outside and the rain is banging on my roof. Not much I can do about that. I have a time schedule to keep to, so we'll just have to keep on trucking. So here is the tank close up. Now, and we'll make a little bit of a disclosure. After that rather disastrous start on the table there, with these tracks sort of being a little bit out of round, I did actually take one off, or them both off in fact, and as you can see they're oval, and actually put them in a bowl of boiling water, and that actually made them go nice and round. So I put them back on the car, or back on the tank, and ran around my house, and to my delight the tank runs reasonably well. It's about as quick as you saw it on the table, but it's reasonably manoeuvrable. It's quite good fun. It doesn't like turning on the spot that much on carpet, but it'll do it kind of, and it scoots around the place. It's quite fun, I guess. But I think we'll have more fun out of it as a slot car. So let's just take it all apart now and see exactly what we're dealing with. Now, I've not been into this tank at all yet, so it'll be interesting for me to find out exactly what we're dealing with. I think I have a vague idea as to what's going on inside, but I'm not entirely sure. So I do actually have plans to replace these two pieces here with some sort of reflective material and putting 2 red LEDs in the back of it. And I also want to put 2 green LEDs in the front, and I think that might make it look quite cool as it's going around the track. So let's just take off these bits and just see what. Fortunately, it's all got screws on it. So a lot of these modern toys, they don't have screws. They're sort of glued together and all the rest of it. But this has actually got screws. So I think for the most part we can actually get into it. A couple more in there. Right. Okay. So there's the screws, I think. And what are we doing now? Oh, well, there we are. That was rather easy. No great problems there. So we just got a simple ESC control board receiver and then antennae in the roof, which looks like it'll just sort of peel off. And what else we've got? Not a lot, to be fair. I guess these 3 screws here are the gearbox screws, so let's take those out as well. And see, now I did have a plan to put in a 25k long can motor and a 4:1 gear ratio, and I'm hoping that that is still the plan. And we'll just see now, it all depends on what's underneath this gearbox as to whether these 2 axles here are joined together or whether they're like sub-axles. So we'll find out now. Right, okay, so this is where we're at so far. Let's see now, take out a motor there, take out that motor. Looks like did that come out, not sure. Yep, there we are, it's out. And right. There we are. Right, so it is actually, hang on. Right, okay, so it's on 2 stub axles, right? With these little subs. Let's take all this apart because we don't really need any of this where we're going. Okay, right, well, so there we are. So it's on some sort of loose axle that's fitting inside the wheel, and obviously this plate here is obviously keeping the whole assembly locked inside the chassis via these sort of keeps inside here. So let's just carry on and take out this receiver board, which I may be able to use it on something else at some point, who knows. Just take that out there. There we are. So we can take that away. I think we'll be a little bit brutal, and I think I'll just snap off that wire because I don't think, there we go. And this one, I think, because we don't really need that where we're going either. Let's be a little bit brutal with it. I don't have a pair of cutters on me. There we go. Right, okay. So let's take that away for one moment. And let's see what we got. Take those gears away there. Okay, lift up that. Put that back in there. Yeah, I think that is doable, actually. I think if I can get some space, actually, you can actually take off that in there, actually, and just see. Actually, I wonder if I could drive it from the front axle. No, I won't be able to because I need to drive it through these geared rear drive wheels because of the toothed drive belts. But let's have a look. Does that come off there? Yes, it does. There we are. Right. So there we are. Right. So yeah. So that. Hang on. That's loose in there. Does that come out of that as well? Oh, crumbs. If this comes out as well, are these two halves joined together? Crumbs. It's all slippery and gooey. Right. They're locked together. And we'll just take this one off as well. This is a bit of a delve into the unknown. So you're coming with me for this trip because I don't really know. Right. Okay. Right. So there's actually a drive in there. Right. Okay. And somehow, I know that goes the other way. Did that go that? I actually don't know which way it went now. Right. Maybe it went that way. Yes, it did. And oh, I see. There's two halves. Right, there we are. Yes, so this is the insert, which I might be able to get a shaft in that. And then that goes there on a drive. And then this one here has got this little half insert there, which kind of locks into that half insert there, which gives us the locked cup. So, yeah, the wheels fit together. So it's basically just going to be a case of making up some sort of hex that goes... Actually... I think that I've got some brass hex which might just go in there. If that's a standard hex, I've got some brass hex that'll go into that. I can bond it into the wheel, and I could probably just put a grub screw straight through this wheel, straight through the hex, and actually into a standard sized slot car shaft. And then I could probably use that maybe to go inside there to hold it all together. Don't know. We'll find out. Anyway, so that is all very doable. So let's go to the bench and I can give myself some time to think, and then we'll start turning this into a slot car. Okay, so this is a little bit of an unknown journey. So I want to try and keep it simple because I want a bit of a rest on my brain. So I've had a bit of a dig around the back end and I've gone through all sorts of convoluted ways of doing this. But I've decided to try and stick with the original parts that the actual model came with. So these are the original bearings. They're very, very good bearings, and they just slide onto that back axle like that, and they work extremely well. And then they drop down into the chassis and they locate in those kind of location points in the chassis just there. So it'd be a shame not to use that. Now I had thought about making all these out of brass, but I have to file in the hex because I haven't got any hex of the right size. It's about 7mm hex and I've only got 6. So I thought about doing that. That means then I could have drilled and tapped into the plastic here and done all sorts of things. But I've decided to keep it simple. So the way that what I've discovered here is that those two parts go on like that. The axle, which is 3.5mm, goes in there like that. And the axle is a thing that keeps all this in its correct position. And that whole thing just drops in like that. And as you can see, this now is locked in there, and that one there is locked in there. And it's locked because the bearings are being held in by these bulkheads, and the axle is the correct length, and it actually stops these wheels from moving in too far. So we can use that whole system there. But we do need to lock the axle to these shafts because obviously being a tank, they need to maneuver this way, so they do need to opposite rotate, but I don't want that in a slot car. So what I've decided to do after some thought is pop this on the lathe and just machine off this gear, so we extend this shaft as a flat. Then what I think I'm going to do is fill up that hole in there and in there with epoxy, having roughed up this shaft a little bit, and then assemble the whole thing together like that, and then pop that axle in there as well, and then sit it in the chassis just like that and let it set. Then what I think I will do is drill a 1.5mm hole right on the edge of that edge there, so it's just outside the threshold of the bearing, and then I can pop a 2mm grub screw down through the nylon and just nip into this metal here, and that will just give a little bit of extra resistance for the drive shaft. Because I mean, I don't think that epoxy alone is going to be enough to give drive between the axle and this nylon, because nylon doesn't glue very well. So really the glue is really only going to be a packer, something to sort of pack out the axle in that stub axle and take up that space. So then what I'll have then is a solid back axle in theory, but before I glue it together, I want to be able to drive the back axle using one of these BRM 36 tooth nylon crown gears. Now, I got these from Pendle Slot Racing. They're relatively inexpensive, and as you can see, I got 2 in the pack. But more importantly, there's plenty of meat in there to open up that hole to 3.5 mil. I have a suspicion that hole is M3 because it's a BRM in 24th scale. So I think it's a 3 mil hole, but I'd easily be able to open that up to 3.5 mil, which is what this shaft is. And there's still plenty of metal around there to use. And as you can see in the back here, we've got absolutely loads of room to fit a gear down in here. Now, the motor that I've decided to use is from my spares box. It was my ex-rally motor. It's a little bit warm for rally racing, and I also found it a little bit of a peak to it. It sort of got to a point in its rev range where it just sort of came on song a little bit, and it was a little bit unpredictable, I found, for rally, because you need it more smoothly for rally because it's a very tight track and so on. So I found it a little bit peaky for rally, so I changed it for a slower NSR motor. But anyway, this is a 22,000 RPM long can, so it's quite grunty. 22,000 gives you a decent amount of RPM because we're going to be using an 8-tooth pinion. There's slotted pinion here. 5.5 mil hole, 8-tooth pinion, slotted. Again, I got these from Pendle Slot Racing as well. Now, between the gear ratio of that nylon gear and the pinion, I think I get, hang on, I'm going to get the calculator. Yep, better check, 4.5 to 1. So that gives us plenty of power from the 22,000 long can, and also plenty of power and torque through the gearing at 4.5 to 1, because most slot cars are about 3 to 1. I like to run my 24th scale cars at about 3.5 to 1, get a little bit more torque, a little slower top end, but they're bigger wheels. These are actually pretty big wheels, as you can see here. They're pretty massive. Even for a 1/24th scale, my hot rod builds, the wheels still aren't this big. This is essentially the diameter of the wheel, so we've got to bear that in mind. And also, we don't want this thing to go absolutely mad, but we do have a 22,000 motor. So with all that in the mix, I think a 4.5 to 1 will be okay. If it's a bit slow, I can always change that pinion to a 5.5 mil 9-tooth pinion, which will give you, hang on, back to the calculator. Yep, lucky I did that. That's 4 to 1. So that will give us a much better speed. Now, I know that 4 to 1 works because I've used 4 to 1, but it was 4 to 1 on a smaller diameter than this. So I think 4.5 to 1, my original idea, will probably work with a much larger wheel. But we'll have to wait and see. Well, I say 4.5 to 1, plenty of power. So I'll have plenty of power to drive the system. So that's all those details. And on the guide, I'm going to use this Scale Auto 9mm deep wood guide. And just for a matter of interest, the thread that comes on these is an Imperial thread, apparently, but an M5 actually fits it very, very well. So don't know what that's all about. Anyway, so I'm going to use this Scale Auto guide here because it's a nice deep wood guide, which does limit this car, but it's limited anyway because it's so massive. I don't want a 7mm guide in this. I think a 9mm guide would be better. So I'll run it around the middle lane of our MDF track in the club because that is wide enough to take this car. It's a bit of a funny car anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's limited to where it runs. So with all that said, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have to strip out all of this plastic work in here because I've weighed the whole car and it's actually 250 grams all in. So obviously I've stripped it down completely, but I'd like to try and get rid of a bit more weight. So we don't need any of this plastic in here. And I've also noticed that the roof is held in with one screw like that, and there's nothing in the roof, and all this plastic here is not needed as well. So I'm going to chomp all that lot out as well and try and lose some of the weight that I don't actually need. And I've also discovered, I believe, that this motor will actually fit on this rear bulkhead just here beautifully. So by the time I've chomped out all of this lot, we should be able to just have that motor sitting inside there really, really nicely. And then we can put the original cover back on just to finish the model off on the underside. So with all that said, let's crack out the Dremel and start chomping into this and see where we get to at the end of that little session. Okay guys, it can only get less destructive from this point forward. So as you can see, I've chomped out the hole in the top to lose a little bit of weight. Also taken out the bulkhead there because that's not needed. And I'll simply put a bit of glue in each four corner, pop that on, and then glue it from the inside. So that takes care of the lid. I've also noticed it says high speed here. Not so sure that was quite accurate for the original model, but I'm hoping it might be applicable for what we're going to create. Also, I've chomped out all the inside here, everything I don't want. And also the actual original hatch still fits perfectly well, although we've lost the screw. I may have to reinstate that later on. We'll have to wait and see, because the gear may well get in the way of this spring mechanism here when we put it in the back end. Anyway, so there's all the chassis done, and here is our back axle, and it all fits in there perfectly. We've still got all the turning axles and everything else, and then we pop the lid back on. Take that off because we can then see it. You can see that it's all still in there, it's all still working, and I could even put the battery tray back on. You can see really you cannot tell, and if I put the lid on as well, you literally cannot tell that I've done any of the chomping at all, because I do want to maintain the look of this. I don't want to completely destroy it. I do want it to look nice when it's finished. And as you can see, those axles are still all in there, really nice. So you noticed I actually removed that little black piece. That was actually just a pull out piece, so that makes it really easy now to put some aluminium inserts in there with some rear red lights. So anyway, so we're at this point now, so I think what we now need to do is just remount the gear so the gear fits nicely on this shaft, and then I can see if I need to take anything away from the chassis a little bit more. There you are, that's some great progress on the back axle. It's basically now finished. So we've got the gear, nice tight fit on the shaft. We've got the bearings all locked down on the axle with those knurled shafts and glued on. And we've got these wheels all in place as well, fitting on the original fitments that came with the tank. And as you can see, there's a little tiny M2 grub screws right down in there. And I put them in, just nipped into the metal itself, and then ground them down just ever so slightly lower than the surface of the bearing. But this bearing is a huge surface, so any tiny little loss that I've got on the very edge isn't going to matter, because there's still absolutely stacks of bearing surface left. And I've taken a little bit of the original grease just here that was in the actual tank from new, and I've put it back into that grease. It's incredibly sticky stuff. It's gotten everywhere in this kit, so I thought it'd be pretty good to put it back, so I took the advantage. And the grub screws that I used are these little M2 grub screws from Pendle Slot, and they are E9. They are great little grub screws, and they are the 0.9 size. So that's held this axle together really solid. And we pop it into the chassis, it runs very smoothly. Obviously there's a little bit of drag there because of the grease, but it's incredibly smooth. There's no resistance worth talking about. Right, so now we've got the back axle completely finished and ready to go. We now need to think about getting the motor into this chassis. Now, as I suspected, we've got a lovely bulkhead here where we can mount the motor absolutely no problem at all. And you can see that the actual axle, the motor shaft, is exactly where I want to be to get on that gear, and we're not going to have any problems with the battery little latch there, so that shouldn't be a problem. So what we'll do now, we'll bend up a piece of 0.7mm brass to bolt into this bulkhead here, and we get the motor all mounted, and then we can actually get this back end driven. Houston, I think we have a powered space tank. And there is the folded brass bulkhead, all bolted in with a pair of M3 nuts and bolts. And then you can see the motor there bolted in with a pair of M2 bolts, and the gears are all in and lined up and running perfectly. And if we put power to the motor, we have a perfectly running drivetrain. So with that all done, I think what we'll do now is we'll move on to the rear, and we'll turn up some aluminium bezels to put the rear lights in. We'll fit the front lights and then wire this lot all in. That completes the installation of the lights, and I think you'll agree that the rear lights look rather more interesting than they were as the standard toy. So if we apply some power to the leads, which I've just poked out of here for the time being, we can see that they do that. I think that's quite effective. And on the front end, we got a nice pair of green lights as well, and they look also very effective. Right, so I think with the lights now fitted and we're sort of moving on to the final stages of this build apart from the drop arm, I think we'll turn our attentions to the back end. Oh my, look at that. What a difference a wing makes. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. A little bit over the top, but I don't know. Everything looks better with a massive wing. I'm very, very happy with the way that's turned out. And this is in PLA Tough. So it's not quite ordinary PLA. It's a little bit stronger than ordinary PLA, but it's still pretty robust. Look at that. I think that's a huge improvement. Right, so now we got the body pretty much finished with that wing. I think we now need to think about putting a nice brass drop arm into this chassis. And there we are. That's the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle, that being the drop arm. As you can see, you've got the drop arm nice and smooth. And you'll notice that I've actually fitted it to the battery cover because I thought it'd be quite useful to be able to take the whole thing off and get access to the bottom of the model. So you can see I've got the split pin here, and I used a split pin because it self-aligns per side. And this tube here just make sure that these two pins are pointing in the same direction. It's not glued, it's just loose. It doesn't need to do anything bar keep these two pins aligned. And as you can see on the other side, I've just capped them off with a brass cap, all super glued in place. That's not coming out ever. And as you can see, as I bent it, you can notice that the bend is actually forwards of the guide. So if you get a shock, you're actually pushing against metal and you're not actually pushing against the solder joint on the underside. So you'll never spread that joint with a frontal impact because it's being pushed, the metal is being pushed into metal, not into a soldered joint. So that's taking care of that. And you can see that the guide has got plenty of movement, no problems at all there. And also when you clip the base in, Goes in like that, simply clips in. And you can unclip it if you want to and take it away. And also I did end up reinstating that thread inside there. I made it off camera, just a quick little L bracket with a bit of brass soldered into place and an M3 screw, and I turned down the head of this M3 bolt here to just a few thou short so that it fits into that original hole just there, so we can now bolt that up as well. So we're not just relying on that clip to keep it all in place. So you'll notice that also I've got a slot and a hole. Now that is for the limiter. So the way this works is this bolt will go all the way through in there, and we'll put a nut on there, and that will simply limit how much drop we've actually got. And I ended up making this in brass and not in a 3D print because I wanted that little bit of extra weight. A 3D print would have been fine, but to be honest with you, it is almost as easy to make this out of brass as it was making it out of 3D print. And also the brass is obviously an awful lot heavier than a 3D print and probably a little bit more robust, and certainly more robust with these little returns that I've put in it as well. So I think that was probably the right move. I know I wanted to get the 3D printer to do a lot of the work on this build, but sometimes it's just easier to make it by hand. Now I did notice in the edit, when I was redoing the edit, that gear ratio that you heard, or this gearing, sounded a little bit harsh, and to be honest it's really not. And I did actually have my finger on the top of that shaft to stop it from jumping out. So I just thought I'd show you the sound of this gear again, because I just think it's worth noting how smooth it is. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to come out on camera this time round, but we'll give it a go. So here we go. There we go. Right, so I'm not holding the axle in now, and you can, hopefully that's going to come through on camera. It's really, really, really smooth, so I'm very happy with that. Okay, so I think that covers everything. Let's get this car final assembled, get it on the turntable, and then let's go and play with it on the track and see what she'll actually do. Well, I had no idea how this model was going to turn out at the beginning of this project. And as you've just seen from that track run, she runs fantastically. Huge amounts of fun. Now granted, she's no scale auto or NSR, but come on, it's a tank. It was never going to be. But fun, it's got it in spades. I let all the club members drive this car last night. We were running it around the track and they absolutely loved it. And we even had a little competition to see who could get it over the bridge. And the bridge is 10 feet long, over the bridge in one continuous wheelie. And some of us managed to actually get it to go over the bridge on its back wheels, completely over the bridge. It was enormous amounts of fun, and it had huge amounts of grip as well. Too much grip, in fact. You give it a little bit too much power and she'd just flip over. So really what we'd need to do if you're taking it back to the track and having another really good thrash with it is probably add about 30 grams of weight in the nose. So make that little drop arm limiter a little bit longer so she can really get up, and then she'd be absolutely epic. So one day I may take this car, or this tank, back to the track and have a little bit of a play and see if I can fine tune it and get it even more epic than it already is. So if you fancied buying one of these tanks, I actually got it from a shop called The Entertainer in the UK, and at the time of making this video it was £14.50, so about $15 or so if you fancy doing this yourself. And if you did, it's well worth the go because it's easy to build. It comes apart so easily. You can bolt things in it so easily. As you saw, I used most of the parts in the tank. There's only a motor and a couple of gears that I've used that were external from the actual model. It goes together really easy, and if you haven't built anything like this before, this is a great first mega build because it's just so easy to work on. So I hope that you've enjoyed this sort of content, and if you have, maybe you subscribe and hit the little bell. That would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.